G'day and welcome to Does It Matter with Kareem again. Just want to do a quick one on the Joe Rogan, Joe Peterson controversy, storm in a teacup that's been going on. First of all, I listened to both their podcasts. I enjoyed Joe's comedy and his social commentary, and I read Jordan Peterson's first book, about to buy and read his second book. Agree with a lot of what he says, disagree with some of it. I think if you find yourself agreeing with everything that someone says, you've either encountered an incredibly rare person or you might need to examine the criteria by which you're assessing what this person's saying. But as a general rule, both guys are fairly reliable. Joe's he's like myself. He's a educated martial artist. He's nothing special, and he said some pretty dumb things. So have we all. That's the human condition. I still like him. I like his show. I watch it regularly. I find it extremely informative and entertaining. I think that his stand on COVID was both informed and uninformed, both correct and incorrect, and that tends to be the most common position held by most people most of the time. Who the World Health Organization itself was wrong about things multiple times during the whole COVID crisis. It's emerging, it's evolving. People are going to get things wrong. Having said that, some of the stuff he said was pretty dumb. I felt like he could have looked into ivermectin a lot more than he did. He took some studies that were taken in India from the district of Goa and ran with those, as did a lot of people. University of Maryland, I believe it is, and the University of Alberta in Canada have done some much larger studies and found that the effects of ivermectin were mild to non-existent. So some people got some benefit, most people didn't get any benefit, and those that did get it, it was a modest effect at best. So his personal experience, it's not double-blind placebo tested against, other comparatively acceptable test subjects. So it's just an anecdotal opinion. The problem being is he's a celebrity, so when he says things like that, they have an impact, okay? And that's just life. That sucks, but it's life. He has a right to be wrong, just like you have a right to be wrong. I have a right to be wrong. Thank God for that, because I'm wrong a lot. But we have a right to be wrong. We have a right to be incorrect. We have a right to work it out. We have a right to revisit our positions, and as we should, on a regular basis, to re-examine things that we hold to be true, because often we're either not entirely correct and occasionally we're outright wrong. It was a storm in a teacup. He said some dumb shit. We all have. He says far more stuff that's of enormous value. Even if you don't agree with it, a conversation can be valuable because it raises issues that should be talked about, should be discussed. Public discussion is more important than any of the positions that it holds. Like, for us to be having a conversation with each other is far more important than whether you're right or I'm right. That is just an absolute given that seems to have been forgotten in recent years. Just the fact that we can talk without throwing stones at each other, without spitting in each other's face, and that we can have civil conversation, though that seems to be increasingly more difficult in the polarized social media age, that's the most important thing, because if we keep talking to each other and we remain in context that we're both human beings trying to work it out, that at some point we're going to arrive at manageable consensus. Does consensus mean we always agree? No, not at all. What it means, though, is that people will eventually, under the patient application of lots and lots and lots of information, will eventually concede that certain positions may well be better than others. Okay? You don't have to make a person pull their pants down and bend over, and I use that term on purpose, in order to hammer home your truth. You don't have to do that. You just have to be patient and deliberate in the way that you apply things, and allow them to make mistakes. If you make people fearful of making mistakes, if you make it impossible to revisit, if you force people to double down, we end up in the increasingly toxic situation we're in globally now, where conversations, robust conversations are becoming almost impossible. So, by all means, give Joe a hard time about saying dumb shit. Don't try to cancel him. Don't try and ruin his life. Don't create a danger where there isn't a danger. Does he have an impact? Yes. He's also had a really, really positive impact and helped a lot of people and brought a lot of conversations that never would have happened in the long format to our ears and eyes. And without being able to balance up and weigh all the variables, you're not being fair, and it's not a reasonable take. And in many cases, you're just being an ideological, irrational asshole. Okay? Don't do that. Be reasonable. You don't have to agree with the guy at all. You just have to be allowed to allow him to have his say. You have to allow him to be wrong, just like you have a right to be wrong. You have to allow him to work it out and muddle through it, just the way we all do. And you can criticize him as much. You can criticize whatever he says as much as you want. Just be civil about it. Don't be an asshole. In relation to what Jordan Peterson said about climate, because it grabbed me a little bit, I had a long think about it, and he's 100% correct. Climate is influenced by everything. So theoretically, you could say reasonably accurately that climate is everything. Plate tectonics, geologics have an impact on climate. And climate can have an impact on some level of geologics, though at a more shallow level. So there's some interplay between those systems. So yes, technically, climate is everything. The problem that I had with that statement was that he used it to justify a critique on modelling, on the IPCC modelling and the climate modelling that we're doing. And to some degree, it's valid. Modelling something as complex as the climate is incredibly difficult, and we're not going to get it 100% right, ever. Okay, ever, ever, ever. Even with quantum computers, the variability in climate will always make random, unpredictable, indeterminate events possible and likely. So, even when we've got AIs and quantum computers, we're going to occasionally get it wrong, especially when you're forecasting further and further into the future. The issue that I have is that he automatically assigned equal weight to all those infinite number of variables, those billions and trillions of variables that contribute to climate, because pretty much everything does contribute to climate. And the vast majority of variables that contribute to climate are negligible and or operating on scales like geological timescales that don't apply to the kind of modelling we're doing. We're modelling over decades. So yes, geologically, outside of eruption events with volcanoes and certain types of tectonic plate, sudden tectonic plate movements, geology has a very slow, very mild, almost negligible effect on climate, except on very, very long timescales of millions to tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years. So you can wipe out a whole bunch of variables and reduce them to a statistical error margin, where you take all the variables that are not significantly contributory. You can show empirically that they don't contribute within the time scale of your modelling, which might be 50 to 100 years, in any significant way. You can remove most of the variables that Jordan's talking about. You can get rid of most of them. They don't have a significant effect within that time period. We do have a much better understanding than Jordan was willing to acknowledge of the modelling over that shorter period of time. Let's say a century period of time, 2 centuries, 3 centuries. They're very short periods of times in terms of climate modelling and in terms of the scales that we're talking about. And you can accurately look at the forcings, the the elements that do force climate to change within the time period that we're looking at. So I don't know. I don't think he was being disingenuous. I know that he's looked at climate before and he's worked on climate panels and so on. So I know his understanding of it is fairly good. But I do believe that bias affects everyone, including Jordan, as hard as he works to eliminate it. We all have biases. We all have myopia in given areas that we have to work hard on. I believe that the climate issue, because it's espoused by a lot of freaky people that he doesn't like, people that have been quite mean to him and unfair, probably triggered a little bias there. That's my theory. I'm not saying it's true. I don't know. But when people who are otherwise fairly rational miss something like equal weighting of variables, and they're super intelligent and they're a highly trained academic, you have to attribute that most likely. He's not dumb and he's not ignorant, so it's most likely a bias. And when you see that in anyone, pretty much, it's reasonable to at least not assume outright, but at least play with the idea that there might be some bias or prejudicial thinking going on here. Look at the source, look at who said it, look at what they've had to deal with. That might give you an idea. So that's my theory, that simply a lot of the people that he's had a lot of antagonism with also espouse climate. They're also some of the freaks that want to push a form of climate change mitigation that would actually make it worse, because it would make a lot of people very poor. And when people get poorer, the richer, their behaviour gets worse in relation to the climate. Their behaviour becomes less sustainable, and they chop forests down, they go back to subsistence living. It's not good. You don't want billions of people doing that. That would make the climate catastrophe we face infinitely worse, and its effects would dawn on us much faster. So no, we want to make people as wealthy as possible, and that means things that seem counterintuitive, like increasing the amount of electricity used, not decreasing. Increasing it as much as possible, renewables, but also increasing the amount of electricity that's used, because raising wealth in an economy requires energy expenditure increases. And if you try to drop energy expenditure, well, the way some climate modelers have insisted that we do, we're going to increase poverty, we're going to increase inequality, and we're going to, as a result, jeopardize sustainability. If you want a more sustainable world that actually lowers emissions and lowers overall pollution, then we definitely don't want to make people poorer. And anything that suggests that we do is a bad mistake. Okay, just the same as Jordan was incorrect in giving equal weight to all the variables that contribute to climate, so the people who want to reduce energy expenditure give massive weight to that over increasing the quality and lifestyle of more people so they have less children, which has a massive impact on climate change. And they become more conscious and aware of the choices they're making through their expenditure, which can drive more sustainable choices, renewable power, recycling, and so on and so on. Poor people don't recycle, they don't use renewables, they don't put renewables on their roofs, they don't subscribe to companies that use only renewables, they don't buy shares from companies that are using renewables and that are using sustainable technologies instead. They don't do any of those things. So if you leave people poor and you don't allow them to use whatever they need to use at the time, which may be gas and coal, it may be hopefully a combination of those things and renewables, you're actually making it worse, not better. Again, some of these things are counterintuitive. I just wanted to address the two things, the ivermectin thing with Joe, and just saying I think he's wrong, really, really wrong. But that's okay. I'm cool with that. I don't expect the guy to be right about everything, and I think that's part of civil discourse. And I think Jordan was wrong to weigh all variables for climate as being the same as well. Having said that, I think he's right on an awful lot more than he's wrong, and I enjoy listening to him. I don't want him cancelled, and I don't want him punished for having an opinion. And anyone who suggests that are barbarians and need to go back to school and get civilized. Cheers, and thank you very much.